Hi, guys, and welcome to the latest episode of the Get Your Popcorn podcast. Happy Thursday. I just want to start by saying thank you so much to everybody that's been supporting the podcast. I really appreciate it. I've had a lot of people start following on Instagram and TikTok as well. I've just started with Letterboxd, which is like a really fun thing. So I'm leaving my reviews on there as well. I'm also going to be putting my watch list on Letterboxd so you can see what's coming. I actually have all my movies picked out for the rest of the year. I'll be updating that later today. So by the time this episode drops, you'll be able to see all of me for this year. And I actually have all the way until April of 2026. I'm already pretty excited. This has been a crazy experience for me. I can't say enough how much this is like doing these episodes for my creativity and exploring my love of movies had just made me so excited about film again in a way that I haven't been in a while, and it sort of helped me find myself again. I don't know. This has been great. So I mean, I anybody who's been listening, like I just want to thank you so much and for following me along on Instagram, TikTok, just following me through this journey. And I just want to give a little shout out to my husband who's been so supportive through all of this, and he's been wonderful and encouraging and helping me with the schedule and watching these movies with me. So I just want to say thank you so much. And I want to say thank you so much to my friend Mark, who really encouraged me to do this. Yeah, he has a band called West Street Children. So please check them out. Him and his brother Michael. Without Mark's encouragement, I would not have had the bravery to do this. So I just want to thank Mark so much for helping me, and I want to thank Owen so much for supporting me. That's my husband. So thank you to the people in my life who've been amazing and following along on the podcast. I can't thank you enough. Thanks to my dad who came in, was on the interview with me. Yeah, I just have received such an amazing outpouring of support for people in my life, in my real life. So thanks. It is a little nerve-wracking starting this. I live in a small town and I live next to everybody I went to high school with, and I was such a loser. And you just kind of like sometimes I know I'm almost 30, but you still have that identity in your own head as being such a loser. You're always worried, like, oh, what'll the cool kids think about me? As lame as that sounds. But yeah, everyone has been great. So thank you to everyone listening. I've been listened to in 7 countries. Here, I'm gonna pull up my Spotify for creators. This tells me all about like who's listening and when. So that's been really cool. But here, let's pull up the audience. Currently, my listening countries are Canada, the United States, Russia, Finland, the United Kingdom, Cyprus, and Iceland. And I charted at like 22 for movie podcast reviews in Iceland. So thank you to my listeners there. I don't know how you found me, but hello from Canada, and thank you. Like I feel like honored that you guys want to listen to me talk. This is crazy. Like thank you so much for everybody that's been listening. I also want to just say that I do all the editing. I've just started the video podcast. So I did a video episode with my dad. I've just downloaded this system called Riverside to help me with all this, which has been really handy for editing. Shout out Riverside. Yeah, so I'm not going to be doing audio and visual. So hi, this is my face. You're welcome. Yeah, so I just wanted to start out the episode with that. Thank you guys so much for everything you've been doing for me. It's pretty amazing. So last week's episode was Barbie. So my plan for this week was to do Oppenheimer. I had never seen Oppenheimer. I just went to see Barbie. I was still quite freshly postpartum when they were coming out, so I wasn't seeing multiple movies in the theaters. It was kind of hard for me to get even, out to see Barbie. Any new moms out there, like, it's rough out there for the first little while. Like you're like stressed and it's hard to leave your babies. So I only saw Barbie in the theaters, and I've been meaning to watch Oppenheimer for a while. This episode is not on Oppenheimer. If you clicked on it, it's on a movie called Ed Wood. Because I have to be honest with you, I fell asleep in Oppenheimer. I tried 3 times to watch it. I made it the first like 35 minutes and then passed out. And like I really wanted to like the movie, and I am gonna try again. I think this is more about me than it does about the movie. Like, I know that it was reviewed really well. I know that Cillian Murphy got his accolades for that. The movie was well received. I love Christopher Nolan generally. It by no means felt like a bad movie. I don't know, like, I don't know, guys. I just like couldn't do it. So I'm gonna try again because generally I do love a World War II movie. It's fascinating. It feels very topical given the state of the world right now. And on that topic as well, for any of my listeners in the United States, I just want you to know that those of us in the rest of the world, we see you guys and we're worried for you guys. And, any of my non-binary LGBTQ community here, I need you to know that we see you and we support who you are. Yeah, and if you are a member of that community and you listen to this podcast, just know that my heart is with you guys and I'm so sorry. And this isn't a political podcast by any means, but I'm sure you guys have noticed that I do drop my opinions in there, and I don't even think it's a political opinion. If you don't support people's rights to be who they are and live authentically, like what? Like, how is that ever the right thing to do, to treat people with anything but kindness and the dignity and respect they deserve? So I just want to say that fully with my whole chest. Like, this is a safe space. This podcast will only be, promoting the idea of like inclusion, and we see you. The rest of the world sees you, and the rest of the world, we're looking at the Trump administration, and we can't believe that that's happening either, and we're worried for our countries, and we're thinking about you guys. And I know many people here in Canada I spoke to, we all cried on inauguration day for you guys, and I just need you to know that holy, like the lack, I just can't believe it. I can't believe it. I mean, yeah, I want it to be very clear that this is a podcast that believes in inclusion. This is a podcast that believes in women's reproductive rights. This is a podcast that believes in gun control. This is a podcast that I believe so strongly that everyone should be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. And yeah, and if you don't believe those things, like what? Yeah, and I'm not in a position to like get super political or anything because I'm really not like the best person. But I don't feel like those things should be political issues. Everyone has a right to exist in a way that is authentic to them, and that nobody should be promoting the ideas of the Trump administration. Yeah. What? Anyway, I just wanted to start off by saying that, and I don't know if that's my place, but this is my podcast, and I just want everyone to know that like this is a podcast that is a safe space. And yeah, I can't believe it. And to all my American listeners, because it is 30% of my listenership is Americans, I need you to know that you guys aren't alone, that the rest of the world sees you and we feel for you. And I'm sad that we didn't see the first woman president get inaugurated. And good on Michelle Obama for not being there for that. You are an inspiration. And to any of the performers. Carrie Underwood, how can you stand by that man? How? How? Anyway, enough about that. But I thought it might be topical to do Ed Wood, which is a movie that came out in 1994. It stars Johnny Depp. It's a Tim Burton film. It's based on the story of the real-life director Ed Wood, who, for the purposes of the film, they refer to him as a transvestite, which I'm not going to because that's not the proper terminology. From my research that I have done, I'm going to be using the word cross-dresser, and I'm really sorry if that's not the, like, totally updated thing. That's from what I could find online what was used, but, like, if anybody is, like, offended, like, or like that isn't the proper term, like, please leave a comment. Like, I'm happy to update my language. I'm never gonna want to be, offensive. That's a totally okay thing if that's, if that's your thing that makes you feel comfortable. And like, gender is a social construct, it is, and I believe that. And if that's what somebody authentically lives, then that should be what they're allowed to do. Like, why the fuck did anybody care? And I really admire that the the way that this film handled that was just, there's no criticism of it. I mean, it makes his one girlfriend very uncomfortable, but his wife, his inevitable wife, Ed Wood, his wife was like, okay, that's you. I love you. And like, good on her for doing that in the 70s. Like, this isn't a new phenomenon. This has always been a thing. Just it hasn't always been safe for people to be open. And anybody who thinks that this doesn't go back since the dawn of time is crazy. Okay, that aside. But Ed Wood is the film we're doing today. I think it's Tim Burton's best film. It's before he came a parody of himself. Yeah, this film was released in 1994, as I said. Initially, it was an absolute box office bomb, but is later, kind of acclaimed cult status. It was always well received by critics. Martin Landau won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his role of Bella Lugosi. I will be doing Bella Lugosi's Dracula in October. I'm going to be doing like a spooky month because Halloween is the best. But yeah, he's the original Dracula from 1931. His career sort of petered out pretty heavily. He was inevitably typecast and ended up in these B horror movies, which is what Ed Wood directed. It's based on the movie sort of centers around Ed Wood's beginning movies that he starts up with, Glen or Glenda, and then sort of ends with his Plan 9 from Outer Space. And I haven't decided if I'm going to do like a bonus episode of that, because you can actually watch all of Plan 9 on YouTube. And Ed Wood is widely considered the worst director of all time, and Plan 9 for the longest time before, I think, The Adventures of Pluto Nash, that had Eddie Murphy in it, was considered the worst film ever made. Now we've had some real worst films. I didn't know what was coming. At least Ed Wood had some respect and love for the film process. So I don't think it's no longer considered the worst. But yeah, so this is all about Ed Wood. It's been, yeah, and this movie was, you can't help falling in love with this movie and falling in love with Ed Wood. He's so delightfully like optimistic, and his like love of film and film actors in the process is like infectious. I found this movie to be really uplifting. I found this movie to be a great, discussion about some of those things with cross-dressing. I thought it was a good opener to talk about male friendship and male mental health and the pitfalls of stardom and fame. I loved this movie. I don't think it's a 5 out of 5 just because I don't find this, there just isn't quite the depth that I like in a film. But yeah, definitely 4 out of 5. Like, I thought this movie was great. Um, yeah, and Tim Burton, yeah, hasn't quite at this point in his career become a parody of himself. We're not seeing Johnny Depp and Helen Bonham Carter in everything at this point. He isn't even dating her at this point in the juncture. He hasn't done like Sweeney Todd and Dark Shadows and all those other ones where there's kind of and Johnny Depp at this point is, he's quite famous. He's done quite a few good films, but he hasn't quite fallen into the typecasting that he does once he does Jack Sparrow, which, I mean, the first 3 movies of that series I love, but after that it's garbage. And even arguably the last film of the series is not the most, but I do like it anyway, and I think that's because it came out when I was a kid, so I've got some nostalgia attached to the Pirates of the Caribbean series. But Johnny Depp at this point hasn't become that. Yeah, I'm gonna get into some of the plot and the casting. So we've got Johnny Depp, obviously, as Ed Wood. We've got Martin Landau as Bella Lugosi. Sarah Jessica Parker plays Doris Fuller, who is Ed's girlfriend in the beginning of the movie. I haven't seen Sarah Jessica Parker in a whole heck of a lot. I don't like the Sex and the City series. I mean, I know it was well reviewed at the time and yada yada, but I just find all the characters other than Samantha like so unlikable. And I just like, I don't want to watch a show about characters that I don't like. Sorry, I'm gonna be having coffee breaks to this. I'm really tired. We've got Patricia Arquette, who plays Kathy O'Hara, which is Ed's eventual wife, and she stayed married to him actually up until his death in the 70s. I love Patricia Arquette. She is in a couple of my favorite movies. She's in Holes as Kissing Kate Barlow, so I love that movie. And then she's also in True Romance, which I think is I'll be doing either next week or a couple weeks from now, depending on when I release this particular episode. But True Romance is going to be a bonus episode that I'll drop on Valentine's Day. And I love True Romance. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. That script was written by Quentin Tarantino, I love him. Anyway, I digress. And so that's all I'm going to really go into. There's a very small role by Bill Murray that he's in this, and then there's a whole host of like very small supporting characters. For historical accuracy, it's not like the most right on the nose. I know that Tim Burton got a lot of praise for not having this film be like a mockery of Ed Wood, but almost a celebration of him. And that's what I really liked. And Johnny Depp's portrayal of him is he's so excited and so optimistic. It is really infectious. And then there's a few things that Bella Lugosi does in the film where he owns dogs, but apparently in real life he didn't. There's some jokes that he liked to, go coffin shopping and things like that, which his son said he didn't. I know Doris Fuller is portrayed as kind of like a naggy, sort of negative person in life. And apparently she was much more supportive in his real life. But she did say overall she did like the movie a lot. So I think maybe her portrayal of that isn't exactly what she would have wanted, but she did at least find it accurate enough that she liked the film. It is sort of the end of their relationship. And to be honest, Ed does a few things that would make me mad and bitter too. So I didn't find her to be, an annoying character or you don't understand her motives. Like, I found her to be, a fairly well-rounded character. And the real Doris Fuller actually went on to be a songwriter, wrote songs for Elvis. So that's pretty cool. Way to go, Dolores. She's got her own success story. Okay, well, we'll get into the plot now. Sorry, I'm looking down at my notes. So if you're watching this on a video podcast, whenever I look down, I'm looking down at my notes that I write out. So what I do is I watch the movie once generally in full, just paying attention, and then I'll watch the movie again and take notes on plot, on cast, on just different thoughts that I have during the film, and then I go and I do my research and I type it all up in a big document, and then I go from there. So it's a bit of prep for me to do this. I generally take a couple of days. So this film starts in the 50s, and Ed Wood is really struggling to get into the industry itself. It looks like he's doing sort of odd jobs on sets, and he's really, trying to get in. He sees a ad in a magazine that a producer is trying to purchase a story and to make a film out of it. And it's a film adaptation called I Changed My Sex is the name of the title. And Ed Wood, at this point, is a crossdresser, but he is completely closeted in that. His girlfriend doesn't know that's Dolores Fuller at this time. And so he goes to this producer and he tells him that I am the perfect person to direct this film because I understand. And the producer brushes him off and he's like, I really don't care that this is whatever like you feel. I just want a director who can get this done for cheap and get this done fast. And he's not hired. And on his way home, he's walking past this coffin store or funeral home, and he sees Bella Lugosi, who to him, is an absolute horror icon. But at this point, Bella Lugosi is a bit of a drug addict. He's a bit of an embarrassment to the industry, so they claim. I think it's pretty hard to say that because there's so many films actors and actresses that are drug addicts, especially at this time, they're being given uppers and downers and Dexedrine to lose weight. I mean, and that's still happening. You see with Ozempic and anyway, all the stuff that celebrities do. But that's the portrayal of him in the film and what the industry is talking about. So Johnny Depp meets Bella Lugosi and is just so excited. I guess I should refer to it as Ed Wood, but is just so excited to be meeting one of his heroes. And Bella Lugosi is chatting with him and is also like really intrigued by him and asks him to give him a ride home. And he's chatting with him about the making of Dracula and horror movies. And they get home and they hear his dogs barking and he says the iconic line of "Children of the Night, what music they make," which is a line from actually the original book of Dracula, which I just read before I saw Nosferatu, just because I like to read that one like once a year, once every 2 years, just because I think it's really good. But so Bella Lugosi comes in, he's talking about Dracula and how it's better than Frankenstein. He has this quite a rivalry with Boris Karloff throughout this film, and he talks about him pretty negatively. Boris Karloff, of course, is the original Frankenstein, and Bela Lugosi is also talking about how these new kind of science fiction monsters and aliens and things like that are not as much of a draw because there's something about real tangible monsters that draw people in, and he talks about Dracula and how Dracula is the film of choice for women. There's something, lustful and kind of sexy about Dracula. And then if you want to get a girl, you take her to Dracula. And I think we really saw that with Nosferatu. Bill Skarsgård's portrayal. I saw so many things on TikTok and Instagram and about how women were attracted to this, rotting corpse of a vampire. But there is something, I think, for women and Dracula and how much it draws and this thought of some creature being like completely obsessed with you, and this idea of obsession and attraction, and this like a man who would cross oceans of time to be with you. There isn't a romanticism in Dracula in vampire movies that there just isn't in some of the other horror and monster movies. So I just like noted that. I was like, that's so insightful and something that I really saw in the last couple months with Nosferatu. So anyway, that was cool to me. Anyway, so Ed after this persuades the producer to let him do it and says that Bela Lugosi will be a featured player and he'll do it for a very low price. At this point, Bela Lugosi is just kind of trying to get his fix. He's addicted to opiates at this point. There's points without the film where you're seeing him tie a tourniquet to his arm to inject. You never actually see him inject, but it's implied throughout this. So this film, Johnny Depp or Ed Wood writes a script for. He renames it Glenn or Glenda. And this is where he confesses his cross-dressing to Doris. And Doris has this really visceral reaction, which is done really well by Sarah Jessica Parker to the cross-dressing. She realizes in real time as she's reading the script that this is the truth of him. And at this time it's 1952, like this isn't something that's talked about in society at all. Like we have a lot more conversations about this, and there's RuPaul's Drag Race is on TV, and we see a lot more examples in media about this. RuPaul's Drag Race is loved by millions and millions of people, but drag isn't something that's out in the open. It's illegal to be gay at this point. Like this is a totally different world than 2025. I mean, even 10, 15 years ago, like I'm from a small town, and like I graduated with no out gay people or anybody on the LGBTQIA sort of. There was no one in my grad class that was openly out. And now a lot of people have kind of come out after that, myself included. Like I'm bisexual, but I would lived in fear that anybody would find out that secret. So I can't imagine being someone who cross-dresses in 1952. Like that weight of that secret would be crazy. So Doris doesn't react great, but she also doesn't end her relationship with Ed. She just kind of doesn't want to be around it that much, but she does accept it, and she accepts a role in this Glenn and Glenda film, and she does help Ed Wood work on it. So during the production, Ed and the producer argue about the subject matter, but the producer eventually agrees with Ed and does the production and has the name that Ed wants, on the condition that Ed is able to get the film funding within 7 reels, because at this point, right now we shoot digitally, or at least most filmmakers shoot digitally instead of on actual film. But the way film used to be shot, it was on like actual film rolls. And to anybody that's listening that's like kind of like 20 and under, which is I think is like 11% of you. Film used to be film, and like cameras used to be, you had like 20 pictures and that was it. And you go and get them printed and you don't know how it worked out. But now we can just snap and delete and take hundreds. I mean, it's the same thing with cameras and the way the movie industry like takes film. Like you actually had just reels that were very expensive, and editing used to be watching the reel and then cutting, like fit. That's why it's called cutting. Like, they physically cut with scissors the film and then would put it together. So it's very expensive to shoot on actual film. Digital, you can cut, you can move, it's very easy, it's all uploaded to computers, and that's how sort of the editing process works. Anyway, so he wants it done on these 7 reels to save him money, and Ed agrees. And this is where he has sort of his unusual approach happens. Ed Wood doesn't take more than 1 take in order to get on these reels. So there's this point where one of the actors like bumps into the set, and the set wobbles, and he still gets through the door, and they're like, well, you want to take another take of that? And Ed Wood's like, why? Sometimes people bump into doors. And like, that just wouldn't be, done. And it does, because the set moves. It really, really kind of is jarring to look at. That isn't something like even at that point they would have done. They would have just retaken the shot because the set moved. It's not like a real wall, right? Of course you bump into walls, or at least I do all the time. But anyway, that's part of, they sort of show that that's what's happening. The movie is then released, and it's an absolute bomb critically and commercially. At this point. So Ed Wood decides that he is going to fund his next film independently, and he's looking to find investors instead of trying to get the studio to do it. So Ed, in order to promote this and get more people interested in the film, gets Bella Lugosi a guest spot on a TV show. He also meets and befriends Tor Johnson, who is a wrestler, and gets him involved in the films because he thinks that he'd be very good at playing sort of monster roles. And also during this time, Ed realizes that Bella Lugosi is an addict for real. It's a real serious issue. So during a fundraising dinner at a place called the Brown Derby, which is, I don't know if it's still a restaurant, but it is talked about a lot in the media, or media that's coming out at this time. I'm a really big fan of old radio shows that came out in the 30s and the 40s, and they talk about it a lot as like a kind of a place to be in LA. And I think there's an I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ethel go and eat lunch at the Brown Derby. I'm pretty sure that's the John Wayne episode. I don't know if anyone out there other than my dad who listens to this and my one sister who get the I Love Lucy reference. I don't know if people are really watching it, but I watched it a lot as a kid. And the Brown Derby was mentioned on that. While he's there, he meets a woman that he mistakes as an heiress. And he thinks that she's going to fund his movie, the $60,000 that he needs. But in fact, she just is going to give him $300. And she wants a role in the movie. But he's not aware that she's not an heiress, so he replaces Dolores, who has been working really hard for him, with this would-be heiress. I'm using bunny quotation marks if you're just listening to the audio of this. But yeah, heiress in quotations. And obviously Dolores is pissed. And she and Ed get into this very big fight where she throws dishes at him and hits him in the back of the head. And then the next shot is him walking around set with this ice pack on his head, and the heiress is indeed cast in his film. And then as they're shooting these first scenes, the people at the studio want their money, so they come a knocking. And so he, in the middle of shooting this heiress in her scene, says, "Hey, this is awkward, but I need your check." And she says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I gave you my money, which was $300, which at this time is still, a lot of money, but it's not $60,000. She says, I'm not an heiress. What are you talking about?" So they get booted from the studio. And Ed ends up meeting a guy who's that owns some sort of meat factory, packing plant, and he decides to fund the film as long as his son can be cast in the film, and it ends with an explosion. So you see this through the film, like Ed is making these like little compromises in order just to get the movie done. Like, he wants this done, he's willing to compromise his vision, yeah, again, kind of in quotation marks, in order to get these movies made quick and just to get involved. He wants to get his foot in the door. And he is a big fan of Orson Welles, who's the director, writer, producer of Citizen Kane, considered the best movie of all time. Not by me, but by most people, or most critics. But so he's making these compromises, and he thinks a lot about Orson Welles, whether or not Orson Welles had to do things like that during the process. And at the end of the film, and they have this party celebrating the movie. They're seeing this movie, and it's terrible, but the cast is still like very excited. And Ed does this like cross-dressing kind of half striptease routine, and everybody on the set and the production is like, they're real into it, they're loving it, and they're cheering, they're having a great time. And Dolores comes in and she freaks out at Ed seeing him like this in front of a bunch of people. She's very embarrassed, and she's very embarrassed of the film and what Ed's doing, and she screams at him, just, these movies are terrible. And then I saw this great clip of that with the caption above, every time Disney announces that they're doing a live action remake, that's how I feel. Exactly what Dolores says in that scene is how I feel about the Disney live action remakes. But she breaks up with him, and the film title gets changed to Bride of Monster. Following this, Lugosi calls Ed in the middle of the night, and he's in kind of a drunken, high sort of stupor and doesn't remember that he called Ed. And he lets Ed know that his social security or his government funding is being canceled. And this is all that Lugosi at this point is surviving on. He's not surviving on residuals. Like, this isn't that time in his career. Like, he's not getting any other money. And he wants to commit suicide. And he tries to talk Eddie into doing a double suicide. And he puts the gun against Eddie's head. And Ed sort of convinces him to drop the gun and to keep going. And I think that this is a really beautiful moment in the film that shows just male friendship. And I think we don't always see that on screen to this level. We see a lot of like buddy comedies with male friendship, but we don't ever see these like deeper level moments. We certainly don't see men talk about suicide, even though, you know, a huge portion of the population that commits suicide are men, because they just bottle everything up and they're taught the boys don't cry. And so it was really, I think, a nice scene to see, you know, these two characters that are so vulnerable. And I think this scene is what secured Martin Landau his Oscar. It's great. It's really good. And Johnny Depp's reactions through it are really good. But it is Martin Landau's performance that really shines throughout this. And then after this, Lugosi admits to his problem, which is the first step, and he checks into a rehab. And during this time, Ed is visiting Bella Lugosi. He meets this woman called Kathy O'Hara, who's in there visiting his father. And this is Patricia Arquette's character, and they begin dating. And he tells her on their first date that he is, you know, in quotes, transvestite, but again, cross-dresser. But at this time and throughout the film, that's what they use in the movie. And she accepts him. You know, on that first date, he is who he is, and she really likes him, and she finds his excitement endearing, and yeah, and so they begin dating. And there's a really great scene where Lugosi invites the press and the paparazzi at this time. I don't know if that's what they were called, but the press. And he has them come into the rehab and do interviews with him. And Ed Wood realizes this and comes in and kicks them all out. And Bella says, Eddie, why would you do that? All press is good press. And Eddie says, they're exploiting you. And Bella says, I haven't been in the papers for so long. Like, I just want to get out there. And it's really sad, this like portrayal and addiction to fame, as well as, you know, the drugs. Like this, once you've been recognized and you're world famous and you're rich, and then, you know, everybody knows your name and you're such an icon. So this guy's, you know, he feels like he's nothing. He has no money and he's in rehab, and he's allowing them to exploit him because at least they somewhat care. Anyway, I found that to be quite interesting. Shortly after this, Bella Lugosi dies, and then Ed no longer has this star that's working in his movies. He also meets Vampira at this time. Vampira was the first horror host. She had a cable show where they'd show these sort of B horror movies and intercut with her, and she'd say these kind of funny jokes, very much like Elvira was in the 80s and 90s. And even now, I think Elvira is an icon of herself. But Vampira later sued Elvira for appropriating her character. And it was a news station that actually helped create the character, and Elvira was like writing her own jokes. Anyway, Vampira lost the litigation because I don't think she showed up to court that day. Elvira wrote a memoir a few years ago called Yours Cruelly. I read a lot of celebrity memoirs because I think I recommend one every time I film this podcast. But yeah, so I highly recommend going through that. She talks about Vampira a lot in the history of a horror host and talks about the litigation suit. So it's really interesting if you're interested more on Vampira and Elvira's relationship and that whole concept. I definitely recommend Yours Cruelly by Cassandra Peterson, which is her real name. She's also great. Elvira, if you ever see this, I love you. Yeah, Mistress of the Dark is my favorite So Bad Is Good movie. It's such a cult classic. I love it. Anyway, I digress. Elvira, love you. So Bella Lugosi has died, and Ed Wood has no money, and his landlord is trying to evict him. And then Ed realizes that his landlord's church is wanting to produce some religious films. So essentially, Ed Wood kind of cons them a little bit into saying that he'll produce these religious films if they help fund his next movie, which is called Grave Robbers from Outer Space, which could result in box office success, and then with that money they could produce these films for the church. And there's this great scene where the film crew all gets baptized by this church. And one of the pastors is actually the senator from Godfather Part 2. And there's this great scene that I think is a nod to Godfather, where they're talking about, do you renounce Satan and all his ways? Or I can't remember the line, but it's the same sentence. I mean, they must use it at all baptisms that the priest says to Michael when they're baptizing the baby, and Michael says, I will renounce him. And because there's actors in both movies, I wonder if that was a little nod. I couldn't find anything in my research that said either way, but I personally found it to be a nod. So I'm thinking maybe it must have been. The church members, or the heads of the church, want to be involved in the project, and so they asked for some changes that Ed is really not thrilled with, and he comes into a lot of conflict with them, and he's arguing with them, and at one point they want to change something, and he says, I'm the director, I make the decisions. He's quite upset, and he leaves, and he goes to the bar to drink. Now, it isn't explicitly said in this film, but the real life Ed Wood was an alcoholic, and that was what Doris Fuller really left. He didn't as much leave because of his cross-dressing and his bad films, but it was Ed Wood's alcoholism that really drove her away. And when she talked about this film, that's what she sort of reiterated quite a lot. Anyway, so Eddie goes to this bar and is drinking, and he looks over, and he's still he's been cross-dressing as a director in and out of the film, and he's in his full skirt and Angora sweater, and he sees Orson Welles, and he goes over, and he has this conversation with Orson Welles, who's having some frustrations with the studio making his next movie about making compromises. And he says, the only movie I had total control of was Citizen Kane. And Orson Welles sort of encourages Ed Wood to do that and to have total control and to not kind of give in. So, Eddie goes back and he goes and he takes total control. The only thing he does is he changes the title to, instead of Grave Robbers from Space, to Plan 9 from Outer Space, which eventually he agrees actually was the best title of it. They then go to the premiere of this movie, where he announces it and says that it's dedicated to Bella Lugosi, which I think is a very sweet moment. And then once the film is done and they've showed, he has this lovely moment where it's pouring rain and he proposes to his girlfriend, Kathy, and they run away to Las Vegas and get married. We don't see that, but that's how the film ends. And then there's these, flashcards that tell you, like a lot of biopics, like what happened following the movie, that he never gained mainstream success, that he ended up directing like low budget porn movies. And then he died in 1978. Following that, he was given the honor of worst director of all time. And then his movies ended up gaining like a cult following and a real fan base following that. And so that at that point, following his death, he gave sort of posthumous acclaim. And that's Ed Wood. I found it to be a really uplifting film. I found it to be a good story about friendship, about inclusion and acceptance, and that, if you're a misfit and somebody it isn't your vibe and they're really judging you, like, you might just be talking to the wrong person. And so I found that quite hopeful and optimistic and lovely. And this is a film produced in 1994, so it's not 31 years old. How crazy is that? Oh, my 90s baby is 31. Anyway, but the conversations, although they're using transvestite, are at no point it does the film look down on Ed Wood for that. It's portrayed as like this is his norm and this is who he is. It's not mocked by the film. Ed Wood isn't mocked, and I thought that that was a really great way of portraying that. Johnny Depp is really great in this film. It's before he then kind of falls into his tropes as well. Patricia Arquette is great in this movie. It's fun to see some of those smaller characters. Bill Murray, the woman who plays Elvira. See, I may be mixing it up. Vampira. She's really great. Overall, this is just a great movie that will have you feeling good at the end. So if you're in the mood for a movie that is, has some substance to it, but isn't necessarily going to leave you kind of gut wrenched and thinking about it for days and days and days, this is a good movie to watch. It's 2 hours. It's before Hollywood fell into this like absolute necessary thing of making every film 3 hours long. Yeah, it's a great movie. So that's my recommendation for this week. So thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. Hello from Video World if you're watching the videos. Stay tuned for next week. We'll be doing The Wizard of Oz. And yeah, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Get your popcorn podcast. And again, on Letterboxd if you're interested in seeing what we're doing in the next little while. And I keep saying we. It's just me. Yeah, and also here's my Disney adult merch. Bambi. And then it's a Mickey and Minnie. My husband bought me that. So cute. Yeah, so have a great Thursday and thanks so much for listening.